Hello and welcome back to another Tale of Two Kitties. I'm Mr. Level, and my cats are somewhere around here, I promise. And actually I have three, so I don't know. It was a pretty low-hanging fruit kind of pun. You're not really required to watch this one. If you want to read chapter 2 on your own, that is totally fine. I do normally read this aloud to the class though. And the reason is that it starts out and it can be hard to kind of gauge who is this, what's going on. And so I like to help clarify the opening chapter of the story of the characters just by reading through it. Now, I'll tell you, it's not nearly as hard as the previous chapter, and it doesn't require me to stop and explain a whole lot. So honestly, if you're just looking for a good audio, I promise you there are much better versions of this being read aloud, probably on YouTube, I'm sure elsewhere, I'm sure on places like Audible. So if you're here, you're basically here because you miss me. Let's start with chapter 2, The Mail. It was the Dover Road that lay on a Friday night late in November before the first of the persons with whom this history has business. Okay, so you notice the previous chapter ended with the roads that lay before them, and now this sentence transitions off of that and says it was the Dover Road that lay before the first of the persons of whom this history has a business. That's a fancy way of saying our first character. We have character number 1. We'll follow him for a little bit. The Dover Road lay, as to him, beyond the Dover Mail, as it lumbered up Shooter's Hill. He walked uphill in the mire by the side of the mail, as the rest of the passengers did, not because they had the least relish for walking exercise under the circumstances, but because the hill and the harness and the mud and the mail were all so heavy that the horses had 3 times already come to a stop, besides once drawing the coach across the road with the mutinous intent of taking it back to Blackheath. Reins and whip and coachman and guard, however, in combination, had read that article of war which forbade a purpose otherwise strongly in favor of the argument that some brute animals are endued with reason, and the team had capitulated and returned to their duty. Okay, so the image we should have as we're reading this, we don't want to lose our image, is of a coach of a cart lumbering up the hill, and the passengers are actually walking outside of it. Why? Because it's having such a trouble going uphill in the mud that they have to get out. And the horses aren't helping. The horses want to mutiny and want to turn around and go right back to where they came from, because to them, why in the world do we want to go up this hill? That's stupid. So the passenger, our character number 1, is walking in the mud alongside the cart. It's called the Mail because I'm sure it delivers both mail but also passengers on its way to where? To Dover. From where? Probably London. Okay. With drooping heads and tremulous tails, they mashed their way through the thick mud, floundering and stumbling between whiles, as if they were falling to pieces at the larger joints. As often as the driver rested them and brought them to a stand with a wary, "Whoa-ho! So-ho, then!" the near leader violently shook his head and everything upon it, like an unusually emphatic horse, denying that the coach could be got up the hill. Whenever the leader made this rattle, the passenger started, as a nervous passenger might, and was disturbed in mind. There was a steaming mist in all the hollows, and it had roamed in its forlornness up the hill like an evil spirit, seeking rest and finding none. A clammy and an intensely cold mist, it made its slow way through the air in ripples that visibly followed and overspread one another, as the waves of an unwholesome sea might do. It was dense enough to shut out everything from the light of the coach lamps, but these its own workings, and a few yards of road, and the reek of the laboring horses steamed into it, as if they had made it all. He's describing the fog here. Dickens really likes describing fog. And here it's so foggy, so misty, that you can hardly see in front of yourselves. And it also, the steam that's coming off the horse's body, their sweating steam, or the steam from their sweat, is coming off into the air, and it almost looks like that's causing all of the fog around them. I'm sure it's not. 2 other passengers, besides the one, were plodding up the hill by the side of the Mail. All 3 were wrapped to the cheekbones and over the ears and wore jackboots. Not one of the 3 could have said, from anything he saw, what either of the other 2 was like, and each was hidden under almost as many wrappers from the eyes of the mind as from the eyes of the body of his 2 companions. In those days, travelers were very shy of being confidential on a short notice, for anybody on the road might be a robber or in league with robbers. We read about that in the first chapter, how the highwayman in the night was the captain, right? Well, here's the passengers on a normal coach who are just terrified that they're going to run into a robber and be perhaps killed or at least robbed. As to the latter, when every posting house and alehouse could produce somebody in the captain's pay, ranging from the landlord to the lowest stable nondescript, it was the likeliest thing upon the cards. So every place they stop, they worry that not only could I be robbed by a robber, but maybe someone here is going to tip off robbers to come and get me. So the guard of the Dover Mail thought to himself that Friday night in November 1775, lumbering up Shooter's Hill as he stood on his own particular perch behind the mail, beating his feet and keeping an eye and a hand on the arm chest before him, where a loaded blunderbuss lay at the top of 6 or 8 loaded horse pistols, deposited on a substratum of cutlass. Does he have enough weapons? The Dover Mail was in its usual genial position that the guard suspected the passengers suspected one another and the guard, they all suspected everybody else, and the coachman was sure of nothing but the horses, as to which cattle he could with a clear conscience have taken his oath on the 2 Testaments that they were not fit for the journey. The only thing he's confident in is the horses, and his confidence is that they are not ready for this journey. "Whoa-ho," said the coachman. "So then, one more pull and you're at the top, and be damned to you if for I have had trouble enough to get you to it. Joe!" "Halloa," the guard replied. I'm pretty sure that's exactly how Joe sounds. "What o'clock do you make it, Joe?" 10 minutes, good, past 11. "My blood," ejaculated the vexed coachman. Sometimes, yes, that's how they say shouted. "My blood, and not atop of Shooters yet. Tst, yah, get on with you." The emphatic horse, cut short by the whip in a most decided negative, made a decided scramble for it, and the 3 other horses followed suit. Once more, the Dover Mail struggled on, with jackboots of his passengers squashing along by its side. They had stopped when the coach stopped, and they kept close company with it. If any one of the 3 had had the hardihood to propose to another to walk on a little head into the mist and darkness, he would have put himself in a fair way of getting shot instantly as a highwayman. Think about that. If one of them had said, "Oh, why don't you go ahead and walk a little bit further ahead?" The others would have shot him, assuming that he was a highwayman. Because again, nobody here trusts each other. They all think they're being paid to get robbed at some point. The last burst carried the mail to the summit of the hill. The horses stopped to breathe again, and the guard got down to skid the wheel for the descent and opened the coach door to let the passengers in. "Psst, Joe!" cried the coachman in a warning voice, looking down from his box. "What do you say, Tom?" They both listened. "I say a horse at a canter coming up, Joe." "I say a horse at a gallop, Tom," returned the guard, leaving his hold of the door and mounting nimbly to his place. "Gentlemen, in the king's name, all of you!" With this hurried adjuration, he cocked his blunderbuss and stood on the offensive. Okay, so there's a rider coming up. They can hear it, and they're getting pretty nervous. So he cocks his blunderbuss. That's his shotgun. And here he is, ready to shoot. Who is it that's coming? The passenger booked by this history, that means the character that we're following. There's only really one character so far that matters. All these other guys, they're just whoever's. The passenger booked by this history was on the coach steps getting in. The 2 other passengers were close behind him and about to follow. He remained on the step, half in the coach and half out of it. They remained in the road below him. They all looked from the coachman to the guard, and from the guard to the coachman, and listened. The coachman looked back, and the guard looked back, and even the emphatic leader pricked up his ears and looked back without contradicting. They're all looking back to see what's coming. The stillness consequent on the cessation of the rumbling and laboring of the coach, added to the stillness of the night, made it very quiet indeed. The panting of the horses communicated a tremulous motion to the coach, as if it were in a state of agitation. The hearts of the passengers beat loud enough perhaps to be heard, but at any rate, the quiet pause was audibly expressive of people out of breath and holding the breath and having the pulses quickened by expectation. The sound of a horse at a gallop came fast and furiously up the hill. "So-ho!" the guard sang out as loud as he could roar. "Yo there! Stand! I shall fire!" The pace suddenly checked, and with much splashing and floundering, a man's voice called from the mist. "Is that the Dover Mail?" "Never mind what it is," the guard retorted. "What are you?" "Is that the Dover Mail?" What do you want to know?
I want a passenger if it is.
What passenger?
Mr. Jarvis Lorry.
Our booked passenger showed in a moment that it was his name. You guys, check that out. I'm on page 19 of my book, and I've just got a name for the first time. Pretty exciting. Mr. Jarvis Lorry. Okay, that's the passenger we've been following. He's the one who's standing half in the coach, half out of it, waiting to see. And who's this other guy who's ridden up and who rode up and is now saying his name? We don't know. The guard, the coachman, and the two other passengers eyed him distrustfully. Keep where you are, the guard the guard called to the voice in the mist. Because if I should make a mistake, it could never be set right in your lifetime. Gentleman with the name of Lorry, answer straight. What is the matter? Said. Oh, I should do this with a mildly quavering speech. Let's try that again. What is the matter? Asked the passenger, then with mildly quavering speech. Who wants me? Is it Jerry? I don't like Jerry's voice, if it is Jerry, growled the guard to himself. He's hoarser than suits me as Jerry.
Yes, Mr. Lorry.
What is the matter?
A dispatch sent after you from over yonder. T&Co.
I know this messenger, God, said Mr. Lorry, getting down into the road, assisted from behind more swiftly than politely by the other two passengers, who immediately scrambled into the coach, shut the door, and pulled up the window. He may come close. There's nothing wrong. So we have two characters now. The one bringing the messenger, or bringing the message, the messenger who's on a horseback, that's Jerry. I don't want you to confuse Jerry with Jarvis Lorry. Jarvis Lorry, we're always going to call him Mr. Lorry. Almost nobody calls him Jarvis. Jerry, his name is Jerry Cruncher, and will be called Jerry, or sometimes Mr. Cruncher. He's my favorite character. He may come close. There's nothing wrong. I hope there ain't, but I can't make so nation sure of that, said the guard in gruff soliloquy. Hello, you!
Well, and hello, you,
said Jerry, more hoarsely than before.
Come on at a foot pace, do you mind me? And if you've got holsters to that saddle of yourn, don't let me see your hand go nigh 'em, for I'm a devil at a quick mistake, and when I make one it takes the form of lead. So now let's look at you.
He's warning him that you better not put your hand near your holsters, because if you do, I make a mistake and it takes the form of lead. In other words, it would be a lead bullet shooting your way if I make a mistake. The figures of a horse and rider come slowly through the eddying mist and came to the side of the mail where the passenger stood. The rider stooped and, casting up his eyes at the guard, handed the passenger a small folded paper. The rider's horse was blown, and both horse and rider were covered with mud, from the hoofs of the horse to the hat of the man. Guard, said the passenger in a tone of quiet business confidence. The watchful guard, with his right hand at the stock of his raised blunderbuss, his left at the barrel, and his eye on the horseman, answered curtly. The guard. Oh,
Sir?
There is nothing to apprehend. I belong to Tellson's Bank. You must know Tellson's Bank in London. I am going to Paris on business. A crown to drink. I may read this. He's hoping to read, he's offering a crown, which is an amount of money, so he can read the message. And he's just told us a little more about himself. Mr. Lorry works for Tellson's Bank, and he's just had a message delivered to him from Tellson's Bank. That's what Jerry Cruncher does. He delivers messages for Tellson's.
If so, if you were quick, sir.
He opened it in the light of the coach lamp on that side and read, first to himself and then aloud. Wait at Dover for Mademoiselle. It's not long, you see, guard. Jerry, say that my answer was recalled to life. Jerry started in his saddle.
Well, that's a blazing strange answer, too,
said he at his hoarsest. Okay, so just to clarify, he got the message. The message was wait at Dover for Mademoiselle. So he's supposed to wait for a young woman at Dover. That's what Mr. Lorry is supposed to do. That's what the message from Tellson's said. Now he's telling Jerry to take a message back down to Tellson's, and just so they know that he got it, he wants the message to be recalled to life. Book 1, is called Recalled to Life. We don't know what that means yet. Take that message back, and they'll know that I received this as well as if I wrote. Make the best of your way. Good night. With those words, the passenger opened the coach door and got in. Not at all assisted by his fellow passengers, who had expeditiously secreted their watches and purses in their boots and were now making a general pretense of being asleep. With no more definite purpose than to escape the hazard of originating any kind of action. The coach lumbered on again, with heavier wreaths of mist closing round it as it began the descent. The guard soon replaced his blunderbuss in his arm chest, and, having looked to the rest of its contents, and having looked to the supplementary pistols that he wore in his belt, looked to a smaller chest beneath his seat, in which there were a few smith's tools, a couple of torches, and a tinderbox. For he was furnished with that completeness that if the coach lamps had been blown and stormed out, which did occasionally happen, he had only to shut himself up inside, keep the flint and steel sparks well off the straw, and get a light with tolerable safety and ease, if he were lucky, in 5 minutes.
Tom,
Softly over the coach roof.
Hello, Joe.
did you hear that message?
I did, Joe.
What did you make of it, Tom?
Nothing at all, Joe.
That's a coincidence, too, the guard mused. For I made the same of it myself.
Not only do we not know what it said, neither the guard or the coachman or anybody there. Jerry, left alone in the mist and darkness, dismounted meanwhile, not only to ease his spent horse, but to wipe the mud from his face and shake the wet out of his hat brim, which might be capable of holding about half a gallon. After standing with the bridle over his heavily splashed arm until the wheels of the mail were no longer within hearing and the night was quite still again, he turned to walk down the hill.
After that there gallop from Temple Bar, old lady, I won't trust your forelegs till I get you on the level, said this hoarse messenger, glancing at his mare. Recalled to life. That's a blazing strange message. Much that wouldn't do for you, Jerry. I say, Jerry, you'd be in a blazing bad way if recalling to life was to come into fashion, Jerry.
You might notice he's talking to himself. Jerry is the messenger. So here he is talking to himself about what a strange message that was. And that was chapter 2.